Our apologies for breaking from the executive session a little bit later than we anticipated. As you know, the executive session was to discuss security measures, if you will, and during the superintendent's report, he'll update the public as far as we can go in dealing with that question. Mrs. Kennelly will be joining us shortly, so I'll call the meeting to order. And Mrs. Iacono will be joining us shortly. This is the regular meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education for Tuesday, June 11th, 2013. And the roll call is that Mr. Convertito is here, Mr. Liu is here, Mrs. Gerber is here, Philip Dwyer is here, Mr. Fatterbean is here, Mr. Kerry is here, Mrs. Brand is here, and Mrs. Kennelly is here, and Mrs. Iacono is here. So before you sit down and have to get back up again, I didn't say that quick enough. If you could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One of the fun things that we get to do is to say thank you to staff and students from time to time. And so tonight we have on the agenda, the first item up is recognition of Mr. Glenn Macno, who this year was named by the Connecticut PTSA, Parent Teacher Student Association, and received an award for Outstanding Middle School Administrator. I will attest to Mr. Macno's, I want to call you Glenn because outside of this board meeting, that's what I do call you. Mr. Macno's dedication to our students. He was the Dean of Students at Tomlinson when our children went through the school. Thankfully, our children did not have to see him on certain matters, but they certainly benefited from his leadership in creating a culture within that school of acceptance of all students. Glenn also benefits, as a lot of husbands do, from being married to Carol Macno, because she was also a dedicated teacher in our school system, and so her quality of work rubs off on him as well. And so both of them are here tonight, but tonight it's our pleasure to recognize Glenn for that achievement and award and for his long years of dedicated service. I know that Dr. Title will want to make some comments, and that we would also welcome Glenn if you wanted to come up and make some comments as well. And other board members, feel free to pile on, because this is a good thing to pile on. Dr. Title.
Thank you. I'm going to say, unfortunately, my time with Glenn is getting cut short by the fact that he's retiring. But the 3 years that we've worked well together, I have found him to be the consummate professional, always has the best interest of the kids at heart, knows how to make a tough decision, knows how to handle a difficult situation, very dedicated to the community and the school, and I could always count on him for guidance on a sensitive issue. If I want to get a pulse on Fairfield, Glenn's my go-to person. And at the same time, as a veteran administrator, you always wonder, as a new superintendent, how will people react to the change in leadership? And Glenn has been a leader in every initiative we have put forward. We have a list of initiatives in front of you tonight to review, and some of the ones that some people can go at it half-heartedly, and some people go at it full speed ahead. And Glenn's always been a full speed ahead kind of guy, and really appreciate that. He's when we ask someone to have their data team taped so we can show it to the rest of the administrators who can then pick it apart, he's the one that stands up and volunteers for that, and that's gutsy. So Glenn, this award is well received, and congratulations.
Other comments from board members? Glenn. I think,
Susan,
yep.
we're going to do this. We'll get this going. Here we go. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dwyer and Dr. Title, I want to thank you for your comments. They're humbling, and I really appreciate them. I want to also thank the board for giving me the opportunity at this Board of Education meeting and your busy agenda to give me an opportunity to be recognized for this accomplishment. As I said at previous meetings where I was honored and recognized, although I'm being honored as a leader of Roger Ledlow Middle School, this really is an award that recognizes all the hard work and the exceptional work of students, staff, and fabulous parents at Roger Ledlow. It's the combination and the collaboration of all those groups that makes Roger Ledlow the successful school and the wonderful school that it is. And without everyone working together, there's no way that I would be recognized. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to take a moment to thank the board for all their hard work and you'd volunteer time. 34 years ago, I was hired by Fairfield, and it's been a privilege and it's been a pleasure to represent Fairfield in a town that I grew up in and was educated in, to be a leader in one of the buildings. And I'm confident that that investment 34 years ago has been good for not only the Board of Education, but for myself and my family, and I really appreciate it. I'm humbled, and thank you very much for the constant support that I've gotten along the way, and I would just want to wish the board and the Fairfield Public Schools the best as we move forward, and I get a chance to watch it from the outside now, so thank you very much.
Outside of the meeting, I did mention to Glenn that there was a requirement to serve at least 2 more years in the school district if you are given such an award, but he looked through the contract and he couldn't find any such provisions, so I guess you're committed to retiring, and we're sorry to see you go. Next item on the business is approval of the minutes. Recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of May 21st, 2013. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Iacona. A second, Mr. Convertito. Any discussion? Comments? If not, all in favor of the minutes, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Student reports. Now, this is your final student reports, so some board members may want to make comments and thank them for their year of service, but first, give your final reports.
Good evening. So our school year is wrapping up. Our clubs are coming to an end. Our sports have pretty much ended. There's a couple things that are going on. Our senior exams are starting this Thursday, so we're going to get into a block schedule. Our music awards were last night, and they honored all the hard work that our music program has done. We've recognized the seniors for all their hard work, and they're going off to college. Our AP classes for next year, we just received our work today for the summer, and that's underway. Our next Wednesday, June 18th, our word working program is holding an annual student project exhibit where students have been working on, pieces all year, like clocks and everything, and they're going to be exhibiting them. And that's actually open to the public if anyone wants to go see. Our cross-country team is holding their 3rd annual Family and Friends alumni run, and that's June 15th. And that's their biggest fundraiser. They're preparing for their 2013 fall season. And then our National Art Society will have its induction this Wednesday, and everyone is exhibiting their work. That's actually open to the public too. It's in the Senior Commons at Ward. And my last thing is the budget cut, which was discussed, I know. Actually, if I may, am I allowed to ask some questions?
Ask some questions. I don't know that we'll have the answers for you, but feel free.
It's just like, 'cause I'm affected by it. I'm a swimmer, and I know that we have to have $200 per person to be on the team. Just questions brought up by the team. Where does the money go? Like our $200 that goes.
To offset the rent.
This year, we implemented a student fee as a result of the budget reductions that whenever we had to rent outside facilities, that we would then impose a fee because we had to rent outside facilities. So therefore, the fees that we collect go to the rental, in your case, of swimming pools, in somebody else's case of ski areas or
An ice rink.
ice rinks or whatever. So that's the purpose of it. It's not one, I'll tell you, all 9 members didn't want to do that, but it was a budget reality, and
Right.
so.
Okay.
But that's where it goes.
Okay, and then one other question brought up by a lot of people. Is there an alternative? Is there, let's say, like a financial, I know, that,
Yeah,
No, ask. Yeah.
yeah,
Is
go ahead.
there-
Go ahead. An alternative to,
to paying the fee, like a financial aid sort of?
oh, yes, there are provisions for financial aid for students who can't afford. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a
Well,
provision.
Okay, those are my 2 questions.
No,
So-
thank you for asking that.
So we're starting our fundraising, though. All the sports are working hard. But that's pretty much it. And I just want to say that it's been a great year coming here. You guys are all so nice, and I feel, I'll be here next year, though, so.
Okay. Okay, good.
So, but thank you so much. It's been a great year with
Sure
you
thing.
guys.
Any questions for our ward representative? Ludlow?
Great. Good evening, Board of Education and other guests. My name is Marco Gringello, and this is Alice Rocha. And tonight we're privileged to speak on behalf of Fairfield Ludlow High School. Currently, we're both seniors, and so we've been on internship since the 31st, so we've been out of the loop a little bit at Ludlow. But this is what we've gathered from our friends and faculty at the school. So we still have a few things to talk about here. Something that we're very proud of, and for the first time in Ludlow's history, the girls' tennis team won the FCAC championships. That was very cool. It's never been done before, so that was a very important feat that we accomplished here at Ludlow. One of our star tennis players, she's a sophomore, Lindsay Evans. She's the first doubles, or the first singles. She advanced to state semifinals, which is also a first in Ludlow's history. As well as their coach, Mr. John Reiser. He was voted the FCAC Coach of the Year, and we're very proud of our team there. On another note, this past week, I guess May 23rd, we celebrated the 6th Annual International Day at our school, which is a day that we'd like to, it's meant to foster curiosity within our community and encourage students to learn more about the world. There was 30-plus presentations throughout the day, and teachers had to sign up well in advance because it's such a hot topic. I know that I saw 2 separate presentations, and they're both very informational and very great, and I also presented 2 from Spain regarding the Spanish trip. So that was very great, and it was a very positive outcome there. National Honor Society also inducted 99 new members that met our qualifications, which was very pleasing to hear, that 99 new students met those high standards that we like to see. And another update is that our internship program ends on the 18th, which is a Tuesday, and that following day we have graduation rehearsal for seniors, and Thursday the 20th we have a graduation.
Almost filled that. Well, we have something really exciting coming up at Roger Ludlow Middle School. There's Chris Herron, who is a former NBA star. He's author of Basketball Junkie and also the subject of ESPN's 30 for 30. He lost his stardom to addiction, and so he's talking about that, and I think a few kids from Ludlow are involved. There's a Facebook event for it, and it's free admission, open to everyone. It's going to be a really cool experience, I think. And that's Monday. And we also had the Unified Sports Track Team held a track meet in late May, and schools from all over Fairfield County were represented, and the athletes and volunteers came together to celebrate, which was really exciting. Our Gay Straight Alliance Club had a day of drop-in lectures by speakers addressing topics relevant to building bridges in the community. So that was a cool day, a lot of presentations. I myself did not get to see one, though. And then prom was wonderful. We'll have a picture framed and sent to you, don't worry. And yeah.
Thank you.
That's our last update. It's been so much fun coming here, and it's been such a pleasure working with you guys. And we dare the reps next year to top our prom proposal. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We know that one is going to continue to be at our table, but the two of you are not. Where are you heading off to?
I'm going to the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay,
And I'm attending Fordham University.
very good. I want to personally thank you, but other board members should feel free to step in as well, for the clear and concise reports that you've given, for the excitement that you've brought, for doing something at a board meeting that our superintendent has never experienced in his whole career, and that's having a prom proposal put before us. And also especially for comments and/or questions that from time to time you've asked or made, because I, for one, very much enjoy listening to the students and how they think on issues that are before us. Other board members, Mrs. Brand.
This is actually pretty easy because I actually think I have the best seat at the table. I've had an absolutely wonderful time. It's been a pleasure. Your parents should be very, very proud of you. You do. You come prepared. You always speak well. You do us proud. So thank you.
Other comments, Mrs. Kennelly?
Just one quick comment. I make my comment as an English teacher. No, not correcting anything. But to piggyback on Mr. Dwyer's comment about clear and concise reports, beyond that, something that is a great gift to have, and which all three of you have demonstrated, is you have a voice when you speak and with a personality, and that is so refreshing to hear, and you don't use the word like very much. So well done.
Anything else?
Thank you.
So, as usual, you may stay and listen to the rest of our discussion, or you can move on, although all of us are fully expecting that after you graduate, you will be returning to school for those 3 required days. That's a joke. That's a joke.
No, it isn't.
No, it's not officially a joke. It won't make the minutes. Although I'm sure it'll make the videotape. Okay. Thank you very much. We are now on to Board Committee Liaison reports. We do have a report from the Communications Committee, which is from Mrs. Gerber, and I think Mrs. Brand has an update on the Membership Committee that she wishes, and then a report from the Policy Committee. So Communications first.
Okay, communications, everyone should have the packet that was in board members' Friday folder, except for this one last page that I emailed to you, and that is also was at the table, and there should be information in the back for the public. So just, there are a few different parts here. I'll just try to go through it as quickly as possible and then take any questions or comments. The first page here is just to describe why we were formed, what our goals were, how we met, that type of thing. Then attachment A here is the initial list we came up with in November at our first meeting. Anything that's in bold and italics is something that we've already done, although I will say that number 1 is kind of, I should have maybe done it just bold or just italics, because this last page actually deals with that, so that's one other thing there. So this was just our initial kind of a run at different communications topics that we thought would be important. We did run this by the board, I believe actually right after we met in November. And then this attachment B here is the communications list for board input. This is our final list. A lot of these things carry over from the first list. I'll just go through it quickly here. The first one here is keep in contact with PTAs. One of the things that we did in our committee was to go to all the different PTAs at all the different schools, and it was a really great experience. We got a lot of positive feedback, and so that's something I think moving forward we should try to do as a board, to have board members go to PTA meetings. It's a great way to meet people in the individual schools, have them give you feedback, and be able to share what we're doing. Then the second here is to do a quarterly or trimester report, and you'll see attachment C gives you an example of that. This is just something, a quick recap to kind of let people know what we do. The one that I sent is January, February, March, and just kind of runs through what we discussed, voting items, and then also any other town meetings that involved school issues, and also links to the actual full minutes and Fair TV so that if people want more information, they can get it. The third thing here is a town hall meeting. This was thought to be something along the lines of what the Board of Finance does during budget season. Obviously, we would need to, it would depend on how many people show up. We thought we'd do it in October, November. There's never really going to be a great time to do it because everyone's so busy throughout the course of the year, but that seemed to make the most sense. And we would have some, people could sign up to speak, and then there would be feedback from the board, so it would expand the whole speak for 2 minutes and don't get any feedback, because that was something that people at the PTA meetings we attended said that they would like to have. So that is one of our suggestions. We did discuss Facebook page, and at the end of the day, even though many PTA people said that they liked the idea of it, we just thought that it just had too many practical limitations, and that we should instead focus on trying to get as much information as possible on the Fairfield Schools.org website, and have that be where people go for information. I know a few people said, well, I'm on Facebook all the time, it would be so great to do that, and I think Mr. Liu said in one of our community meetings, well, you just change a few letters from Facebook to fairfieldschools.org and you can see our website. So our interest is kind of to do it in that place as opposed to doing Facebook and have kind of an additional responsibility. Then here, number 5 is an opportunity at each meeting to recognize students who have state recognition. We're thinking more academic and club accomplishments because the other town bodies are focusing more on athletics. So any board members, if you get wind of something that some of our students have achieved, feel free to share it with the chair, and we can have them be recognized at the beginning of each of our meetings. This next one here, number 6, is just to really kind of clarify some of the terms that we all use, probably not always in the way that we should, just in terms of Board of Ed, Fairfield Public Schools, Central Office Leadership Team, District Leadership Team, and School District Offices. This was something we discussed as a committee. We had Dr. Title come in and give us some guidance, and the thought would be to add this to our Board of Education handbook, just to have it there, and we can all try to use those terms in the proper way and encourage others to do the same, just so there isn't as much confusion moving forward as to who does what. Number 7, we have a survey on this first page when we're talking about kind of what the committee's charge was from the board. One of the things mentioned was, of many, was a survey. So we did discuss this in committee and wanted to get some more feedback from the full board. There was some debate as to what we wanted to get, should we decide to do a survey, what we were looking for in terms of feedback. One school of thought was well, we're a communications subcommittee, so we should get feedback in regards to communications and how the board handles that, how we can improve. The other school of thought was we should have a survey and get feedback as to how we're doing as a board on all levels. So I think that's something that we as a board need to discuss. A, if we want to do a survey. B, if we do, whether we want to have it focus on all aspects of board or simply the communications aspects of the board. This is something we thought if we were to do one, it would be best to do it at the end of the school year. So obviously we're not going to be doing it this end of the school year, so we do have some time to really discuss this and decide what we want to do and how we want to move there. Number 8 is very simple. I had discussed this at one of the meetings. We did research other town websites, boards of ed, and a lot of them did have biographical information, so you'll see attachments D and E. Mr. Dwyer and myself just did some bios, examples, and this would be something very easy we could add to the Board of Ed website along with our pictures for those of us who have pictures on the Board of Ed website, Mr. Convertito. In any event.
But not to mention a name.
He's camera shy. So in any event, that's something very simple. If you would like to submit a bio, we can have it posted on the website as long as everyone's amenable to it as soon as possible. Number 9, when we had our self-evaluation, we talked about PR intern to help kind of spread the good news about good things that happen in our district. I think there's some logistical issues just in terms of where the college schedule works out and our schedule works out, where so many big things happen in May and June, and most college students are done by then. So that's something we'll need to kind of work out the kinks there, and also who they would report to in central office. Would they work with the secretary and or the chair? So that's just something that we need to work out as well. Then these last two, 10 and 11, have to do with two things that we'll really have to review when we discuss our bylaws. First is a clarification of procedures for public suggestions and complaints that then kind of what the chain of command is, and if or when something ends up becoming an agenda item, how we go about doing that. And that is actually discussed in our Board of Ed handbook, and I have the page and everything there. But that's something that we could probably, clarify and put maybe more clear language for that. Then number 11, public comment. One of a large amount of feedback we got during the PTA meetings was regarding public comment. So one thought we had, and again, since the public comment is embedded in our bylaws, would be to have kind of a general public comment instead of at the end of the meeting as we do now, have it at the beginning of the meeting. So we would have it at the beginning of the meeting, maybe have a sign-up sheet, maybe have 10, 15, 20 people sign up, and then we would still continue to have public comment before voting items. And with the stipulation that if you've spoken during the initial public comment, that you would not speak the second time on the same topic at least. Then here, attachment C is just the quarterly memo. As I mentioned, this just gives you an idea. I wrote this out, just synopsize the voting items from these meetings. And then on the back here, you can see that I listed all the town meetings that involved Board of Ed issues, provided links to the meeting minutes, town meeting minutes, and also Fair TV. And then these last two here are just the board bios. Then this separate page here, the quick facts about the Fairfield Board of Education. This was something I wrote up before we did all our PTA visits, and I shared it with people and got some pretty good feedback. So one thought I had would be to have this go on the Board of Ed website as well. It just gives you some basic facts about, the Board of Ed and provides some links. On the back here, it just spells out all of the different additional liaison and responsibilities that Board of Ed members have, and provides links to our handbook as well. So, it's all information that's already out there. It's just kind of putting it in an easy-to-find place. And so that's basically it. Oh, and one other thing that I didn't put on here that I'm sure you've already all seen from the minutes is that another aspect of feedback that we got from the public was saying that the minutes are too long and that they're too hard to get through. So what we've been doing now, and I think some people have been pleased with it, is having this voting summary in the front page that just kind of goes through everything that we vote on. And then, so you can read that, get a snapshot of the meeting. If you want to read the rest of the minutes, you can as well. And so I think that that's another way that we can kind of communicate the information in a simpler way. So any additional things from either of the other committee members?
Mr. Liu, any comments? Okay. To summarize, I think the committee is assuming that they can move forward with items 1 through 6 and number 8, absent comments from the board, that items number 10 and 11, they're kind of putting the board on alert that these probably are appropriately discussed when we review our bylaws in November, and that they're looking for feedback specifically on item 7, survey, and 9, the PR. Is that a reasonable summary of where we are? So comments on...
Unless anyone has any comments in any of the other items.
So comments on all 11 items are welcome, but I'm sure the committee would also appreciate comments on number 7 and number 9. Mr. Liu.
Thank you. Do we have any time, like a deadline set, so that the things that we are going to think about can be discussed and then start to either be implemented?
Well, right here on the first page, we did say that we were supposed to report to the full board, the first board meeting in June, and then here on the back page of this, I do say that when an advisory committee issues its final report, it's deemed dissolved. So we thought it might make sense to have one more committee meeting in order to revise the goals based on the full board discussion. So this is kind of our draft, and I think our goal would be ideally to get any feedback changes. We could perhaps try to set up a meeting sometime between now and the 25th, and then have our final report presented to the board with probably, hopefully, very little discussion, since we're just going to be making the changes suggested tonight, and then we can be done. But I don't think if we had to hold off until August, it would be a disaster. I don't think anything awful would happen. But I think the goal was to try to finish by June, unless there's some reason why we can't. So.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Liu? Yeah. Okay. Mrs. Connelly.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, for number 5, regarding the recognition of students, Again, I'd spoken with Mrs. Gerber about that. You know, had kind of hoped it was going to be a little bit more formal, as opposed to just our keeping our ear out of you know, trying to put together some kind of description of what we hoped and get it out as a formal communication, whether it's to principals or PTAs, you know, just saying, you know, let us know. I believe Dr. Title has an internal newsletter that goes around, so it's, you know, maybe something that could be communicated through that. But just, again, it's wonderful to see what the students do, and I think it's a good reminder for the community, a good reminder for us. But that was one point I had. Second, regarding the survey, I had thought it was more regarding the communication, you know, how well are we doing communicating? That had been my impression, but the one thing I would say, I know when I was working on the Racial Imbalance Task Force and we tried to do a survey at the end of the school year, it was a disaster in terms of feedback. We had to do the same survey again, I think it was September, and I mean, you know, we at least doubled the returns on that, so that's just, I know it seems counterintuitive to find out how you did, and you need to wait till the fall for it, but it didn't get much back. And again, just to repeat, I still love that idea of the PR intern. If there were a way to work that out, I think that would be of value.
Well, I do think with the number 5, with the recognition of students, I think our thought was to just maybe start out kind of with a word of mouth type thing to see how it goes. I think our concern would just be if we ended up with an enormous backlog, if we put out too big a request that we might not be able to honor everyone who we wanted to. So I think it's kind of a playing it by ear type thing to see how it works, and then if we need to do more or less, we can adjust it as we go along. But is that?
But certainly if board members had a thought as to how to more formalize it, the committee could look at that and make that as one of the adjustments in the draft when they bring it back to you. Any other comments on the recognition comment that Mrs. Kennelly made? Mrs. Iacona.
Yes, this is something that the board used to do, that we actually eliminated through, I can't recollect why, but if you're looking for information, you might want to go back into our minutes for some previous meetings from previous bylaws, because we used to do a student recognition. It was a celebration that we always did. You'd have to go back. I've been on the board since 2007, so sometime between 2007 and today, we got rid of that. And I can't even give you a really good reason why.
But, so that would mean
So that
prior to
might help,
2007.
right, that might help you get some kind of semblance of how we used to do that, why we used to do it, where we used to do it. And it was with an alternating education business meeting, I think. I'm not sure which meeting we used to do it.
Mrs. Brand, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, we were talking about students, and we did used to do it, and it was wonderful. The other thing, I'd like to see that's one component, but we always had a recognition when our teachers retired, and then when new teachers came on, and we've sort of fallen out of doing that as well, and I think it would be, again, representative of the community if we would consider that. If I may, because I had a comment about the survey as well.
Please do.
Okay. Relative to surveys, how you construct them is extremely important, because that ends up basically telling you what your yield is going to be. So I would strongly encourage, regardless of what you decide to do, whether it's going through the community, which I think would have tremendous value, or just communications, but regardless, you might need some person or organization that does that and understands how you construct it, because otherwise, you know, we might not get the kind of information we're looking for.
Right.
Mrs. Iacona?
I'd just like to piggyback actually on what Mrs. Brand has said, and she and I have both been around the block on this one. I don't think that we should be moving forward with a survey at this particular juncture, because to her point, you need to be very careful in the questions which you ask and how you ask them to get the data that you're really looking for. And to do that, you really need to hire an outside consultant, which I would imagine would encumber funds, of which we don't have right now. So I would hold off on that. I think it's a great idea and a great thing that we should do. I, too, like Mrs. Kennelly, this is the Communications Committee. I thought the survey would be about communications, not about the board. That's a great idea for board goals coming forward, but in terms of a survey, I think that needs to be focused on communications. I think it's something that we put as a board on our to-do list, something that we plan for, budget for, think about, put out an RFP, interview people, and get an idea of what we need to be doing. Or maybe there's even an association that could do it for free, but it's definitely not something that you want to sit in a room and develop yourself. There's strategy behind achieving appropriate comments. And with the PR intern, I was the one pushing for that. I used to work in human resources. We live in a university town. There's no reason in my mind why we can't call up the 2 universities that are right here and see if we can't bring on an intern who would work with us for the first semester, and then an intern that would work with us for the second semester, and who they report to. I would look to administration to see where their greatest need is and where the best place to put that person would be in terms of delving into helping with our communications. But I think there's a lot of things they can help with in that regard, and I would encourage us to delegate that as a board to administration to seek out that opportunity with the schools around us.
Any other, Mr. Fattabine?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to certainly thank the committee for this list. I think it's a fairly comprehensive list, and my concern is that we may not get all these things done for that reason. The 2 that I think are most important to me in establishing communication with the community, which is really what this is all about, is number 1, where you have the board members attending PTA meetings, as well as a town hall meeting. I think those are, in my opinion, the more effective ways to gauge the community and get a feel for what the community is, and have the community have some interaction with board members at less than a formal board meeting. So those are the ones I think are high in my list of priorities.
Any other final comments? When we created the committee, I'm not sure exactly we fully understood what the product would be. It's a very good product. It might be that we are going to vote to accept the report, because if Mr. Fattabine is correct that we can't get it all done on day 1, this may become part of the discussion on next year's board goals as to what is important for us to jump right on. But if other board members have other thoughts as to whether we're going to adopt it, which means that we commit to each of the items, or what, please let me know between now and the next board meeting so that the committee can give consideration to that, either by presenting things in like a order of priority, or considering whether it should be asked that we are voting to accept it or to adopt it. Is that a fair understanding of where we are at the moment? Any board members have any comments on that conclusion? I want to thank Mrs. Gerber. I'll thank her again when the final report is before us, but she has led a very good ad hoc advisory committee. Okay, before we get on to the policy, you just have a quick comment on the membership goal, on the Mission and Goals Committee.
I would say that at this point, it will be 16 hours of work that folks have put in. I think it will end up being 19. We've had some real troopers who have put a tremendous amount of time. I also want to specifically mention Mr. Jeff Burt, because he's been, quite frankly, indispensable of taking a lot of the thoughts and a lot of the verbiage and putting it into a written document that was, quite frankly, indispensable. So we're close. We have a meeting on Thursday, and I think we will have some recommendations coming to you soon. There's also something I wanted to mention about the Cooperative Education Services Board that Dr. Title might want to weigh in on as well, and that is that the state is moving towards a common calendar for school districts and the significance of that. And I am assuming that that's, quite frankly, laying the foundation for some kind of sharing of services to have some cost-saving measures. But the implications of that, the State Department of Ed is also talking about having templates for districts and what that might look like. Relative to SES, we're not all that different in this area. There isn't a whole lot of variability for some of those very reasons. So that was one thing that I thought was very important that the board should be aware of. The other thing is to send a compliment, because we had a Board of Health meeting last night, and I am aware, as the other board members are, that we did have some concerns with Osborne Hill in a couple of classrooms. You know, faculty felt they had a damp odor. It was acted upon very, very quickly. The Board of Health was there very quickly, talking with parents. And I actually wanted to thank Sans Cleary, because I think it makes such a difference when we address those issues up front and very quickly. And I think we build the trust when we do it, and I can't say how important that is. So thank you.
Okay. On to the Policy Committee. I'd like to make a couple of comments, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer. The issue of the Policy 60...
Excuse me, Mrs. Iacona, did you have something you wanted to say?
No.
No? Okay, thank you. The issue of the Policy 6200 came up at both the December and January meetings of this board as it related to adoption of the math textbook that was in a pilot stage in this past year. And in January, after consideration of a variety of issues, the board allowed the pilot to continue until it came to full recommendation, and we did not feel that a vote was needed at that time. I still believe, and personally I still believe now, that the pilot conformed with both the spirit and the intent of the state law and to our policy. Local boards of education have to have some flexibility, in my mind, of piloting curriculum, textbooks, resource materials, before they make a change to them or commit valuable resources to them. This went before the State Board of Education, and as a result of the technical interpretation of their staff attorney, the State Education Commissioner recommended, and I'm quoting from his report, a subcommittee conduct an inquiry of the count 2 of the complaint. He did that while at the same time writing that while I hesitate to interpret the statute to mean that a local board of education must vote on every pilot that it conducts, the pilot in this instance involved a new textbook for every student in Algebra 1 for the duration of the school year. We, as a board, recognized this issue in January when we referred the review of the Policy 6200 to the Policy Committee. I believe that we, as a board, said we should review that policy and perhaps adapt it to give clearer definition to what is meant by a pilot and give direction to our staff in conducting pilots. And so we referred that to the Policy Committee that has discussed that on at least 2 different meetings. And so we're here to listen to a report, and I think that they're also looking to get feedback from the board as to our thoughts on the matter as well, but I'll leave that up to Mrs. Kennelly to go forth from here.
Okay, first my thanks to the board that when I put out my plea for feedback from the board before we even went into the policy committee, that I did hear from every member and sincerely appreciated that. All that information was put together and shared with so that all 3 of us had that, as well as administration. Policy 6200 curriculum remains in policy at this point for a great deal of additional discussion. You know, the bulk of this past meeting regarded language, to include language for pilots or not. I mean, there was no point in going any further if our recommendation was going to be that there be no pilots, period. And that debate alone took us a good 90 minutes, going over everything that was involved with that. So to jump to the end of the meeting, it was finally, the 3 of us did agree that pilots are a valuable tool necessary for a district to do, but there's still a lot of work to do just from that point. We need to define the terms involved, starting with the definition of a pilot program. We need to establish parameters regarding the length of an acceptable pilot, the number of students involved. We also spend a good deal of time differentiating between, do we need 2 different terms, pilot program versus pilot study? The point being, we as a committee recognized the difference between instructional method, that a teacher who's working, or a department, or a school, or a whole grade level that is working on an instructional method that they are tweaking, so long as that it is delivering the approved curriculum with the approved district resources, board-approved resources, that's something that is within their prerogative to alter. But that anything that they are doing with content or skills that is in addition to the curriculum, that's something that teachers are doing all the time, and that we recognized it as such. We're not looking to tie the hands of teachers or their administrators for doing something like that, and that new resources being used along with the district-approved resources, that's one category. But in terms of coming up with this definition, coming up with the parameters, determining the issue of what does and does not need Board of Ed approval, because we do believe they need to come before the board once we define them, once we establish the parameters, and also what would be the nature of the reporting. What is it that we are looking to hear in terms of the breadth, the data, et cetera, that is to be produced? All of this is what we now have to tackle once the three of us finally came to the conclusion among us that pilots are valuable for the district to do. So that is just a summary of that component. That said, we did have additional discussion. We as a group were fairly unequivocal in our opposition to what happened in our district this year, and that we are looking to give the central office and administrators the guidance so that something like that doesn't happen again, because we have set out clear parameters for that. We also, and to this I'll turn to Mr. Fattabine, if you'd like to add anything in addition, in terms of any communication out there that it was our flawed policy that led to this, that we do not believe that this was a policy issue, and that we are doing right now, though, is in response to the administrator's request to give them additional guidance, which we appreciate. They didn't come in with a recommendation. They came in with looking for genuine guidance from us. And so I'm going to pause right there. I have a few other comments, but at this point, since I've opened the gate, I don't know if Mr. Fattabine would like to expand on that anymore.
Mr. Fattabine.
I can expand upon it.
Do you want to?
Not particularly, but this is the only forum I was given the opportunity. I had requested an executive session on this matter because I believe it may relate to some strategy involved in an ongoing matter that is in the nature of litigation. Because as you know, the State Board of Education has ordered an inquiry which is ongoing. So I would have preferred a lot of these discussions be held in an executive session, but in any event, I'm going to limit my comments to my views and my characterization of my interpretation of the investigative report issued by the staff attorney. But in any event, I think this whole situation bothered me quite a bit, and I became somewhat emotional at our last committee meeting, which I try not to do. But I really think this is a situation where there's been a lot of miscommunication, misstatements, and even mischaracterizations as to what the facts are and what the issues are. There is nothing in the state, the staff attorney for the State Board of Education in the investigative report that indicates any of our policies are contrary to statutory provisions. There's absolutely nothing in there that I found, and nothing persuasive. I think that our position on this was somewhat flawed in the beginning. I never received a copy of the reply that was filed in response to the complaint prior to the filing of that reply, and that took certain positions that I may have not necessarily agreed with. Had I been aware of them or had the board had a discussion on those, I'm not sure what the board would have done. But this is a serious matter, and it's being treated as a non-serious matter. In my opinion, I can only indicate what the staff attorney has indicated in public as to what her comments were. Indicating that Laura Anastasio, staff attorney for the Connecticut State Department of Education, stated that this was an exceptional situation. She has not seen anything like this in the 10 years she has been there, as they rarely receive 10-4B complaints at the basis on which the complaint is filed. She continued by stating it is a very formal process and is specific to very serious statutory violations. So in the staff attorney's mind, it is a serious matter. I am somewhat in agreement with that, and I don't want to get too involved in this, but there are, in my opinion, misstatements, mischaracterizations of the issues, and that bothers me, because I think it's deceiving the public, and in my opinion, is not proper. And I think I should stop at that.
Any other comments from the other member of the Policy Committee? Mr. Convertito. Any comments from the General Board? Mrs. Brand. Oh, I'm sorry. Mrs. Brand.
Yeah, I appreciate what Mr. Fattabine did, because quite frankly, I know it takes a lot of courage to do what he just did. That's number one. Number two, relative to our current policies, I agree. How they stand now is perfectly fine. What I wonder if not what we're doing when we're talking about improving the policy isn't actually the policy portion so much as it actually is the regulation portion. So what I think you may be trying to do, and quite frankly, I sent you the recommendations about getting parental permission, parameters, all of that as well, but it occurs to me as we're sitting here that perhaps that's not the policy part, that's actually the regs. So, just as another thought, it occurs to me as we're talking about that now, which quite frankly would make sense for what it's worth. But again, I just wanted to thank Mr. Fattabine.
Yeah, clearly, whenever we pass policy, for some policies, there are administrative regulations, and they need to, I'll say, be conformed with the general direction of policy. So I think Mrs. Brand makes a good point. Mr. Liu.
Thank you. I just have 2 points. First of all, I agree with what Mr. Fattabine said. I think this is a very serious matter, and it's very troubling to me in the way that it's being embraced. I think that it doesn't seem to be such a big deal. I think one of the things that I find interesting is that when we were trying to discuss this back in March or earlier, I was slapped down for saying miscommunication or misled by our chair, but this is what these findings are saying. The other thing is, and that's the first part of it, the second part of it is after that initial complaint goes out there, there are several communications that go to Superintendent and to Mr. Dwyer that the board never saw until a week ago. 3 months go by where we're not privy to any of this information, and I think that's very troubling because, as Mr. Fattabine says, I think as a board, since we're the ones being charged here, should have had an opportunity to weigh in on how this was going to be handled. So now we're at this point, we do need to discuss how that's going to be handled, and I guess we're saying tonight that this is going to be done here in this public setting. I'm not sure how that's going to be done, but I think I think we have a big issue here that really deserves the kind of weight that it's obviously carrying. The attorney says 10 years she hasn't seen anything like this. And I find it also very, troubling that it might have necessarily not been here. We could have made some of this go away if we had been informed about some of these correspondence.
Mrs. Gerber.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, I think we did actually get some updates on this in our Friday packets. I mean, I don't think 3 months went by without us getting any.
Just to clarify, each of the documents that either was sent to the state or the state sent to us was provided to the Board of Ed, so the phrase, we didn't receive any documents probably would not be accurate. There were some administrative transmittal emails that I will accept responsibility for not including the administrative transmittal memos that might have come with the document and just got you the document instead. And to the extent that there's any information in those transmittal memos that board members thought they should have seen, I apologize for only having the source documents sent and not, as I say, the emails. Any other comments from board members? Mrs. Iacona.
I clearly feel completely left out of the loop and would welcome an executive session to be filled in on the litigation and the feelings that Mr. Fatabeen have. I don't know if something was discussed at policy that the rest of us know nothing about, that somebody got something that the rest of us don't know something about, but I personally would like someone to explain to me where the miscommunication and the misrepresentation of the facts happened, because I didn't get that memo. I just want to tell you what I got and what my take on this is, and I'm not expressing you're right, you're wrong, whatever. I just am telling you how I heard this, how I experienced it, and what I went back and looked at. So again, if we want to move to go to executive session right now to discuss pending litigation, I'll be happy to put that motion on the table because I'd love to hear what's going on that we don't know about. But this is my recollection, and I went back in the minutes, and I am 100% open to hearing about what ill will was done. In my opinion, in essence, by default, we approved the continuation of a piloted textbook by not exercising a vote against the book use. We had 2 opportunities as a board to vote on the book, and the majority of us declined. I cite the board's meeting minutes from back in December. Mrs. Kennelly, if approved, to add an item to the agenda would add the recommended motion that the Fairfield Board of Education instructs the superintendent's office to cease the use of an unimproved textbook, CPN. This was seconded by Mr. Liu. Mr. Convertito stated he will not vote for such a motion because there is not enough information on the text. This would leave a whole population of the educational system out on a limb. Mr. Carey stated that his concern is the public may not have an appropriate notice to speak their mind on this topic. Ms. Iacono is not in support of adding this item on the agenda for that same reason. Mr. Fatabeen stated that he feels it would do more harm than good when dropping the text so quickly, and he is not certain that it is an unauthorized text. Mrs. Brand supports putting it on the agenda. Mrs. Kennelly stated that she withdraws her motion. This was seconded by Mr. Liu. Mr. Dwyer stated this motion was withdrawn on a friendly basis. So here we had an opportunity, if we thought we were in violation of the statute, to go ahead and vote on the book or withdraw the book or whatever, and we decided not to do it. Then at the very next meeting in January, Dr. Title again addressed the board regarding the textbook. And in his report, he said, quote, you done rolling your eyes, Mrs. Brand? The administration...
Mrs. Iacono.
I'm sorry. The administration is completely open in terms of what is recommended for secondary math. Dr. Title went on to say, quote, a full secondary math report on the curriculum and the textbooks will be given in April. Dr. Title stated that there is tremendous interest in this topic and the administration is taking it very seriously, end quote. Therefore, I think it's inappropriate to say that Dr. Title took none of this seriously. I think it's inappropriate to say we didn't take it seriously as a board since we had 2 full discussions on the issue in December and January. Some of this I feel like is a witch hunt, which only one side of which is being played out in the press. And again, I will move to go to an executive session if there's information that we need to have, because I'm alarmed. And the rest of the facts from the January meeting are this. A couple of quick points. Mr. Dwyer said that there have been questions about the curriculum process. The policy committee accepted the assignment and that they would go over the policy. Mrs. Brand thanked Dr. Title. Mr. Liu thanked Dr. Title for addressing the issue. Mrs. Kennelly thanked Dr. Title for addressing the issue. Mr. Fatabeen thanked Dr. Title for having an open mind. And Mrs. Brand thanked Dr. Title with meeting with the parents yesterday. So, and I cited here, and I won't go on about what the ramifications of the state are. And I too take the law very seriously. It says in these 2 things there are a couple of things that can happen here. The State Board of Education can find no failure or inability. And that means if the board, the state board, determines that the Board of Education, that would be us, has not failed or is not unable to make reasonable provision to implement the educational interests of the state, the board shall so state its finding in writing to the parties. So that's what we're waiting for. We're hoping that, we did not fail. If we did fail, failure or inability, that's part B. If the board finds that the Board of Education has failed or is unable to make reasonable provision to implement the educational interests of the state, the board shall require that the Board of Education engage in a remedial process to develop and implement a plan of action through which compliance may be attained. A statement of specific steps will be undertaken to remedy the failure or inability. A detailed timetable of the expected dates for compliance with each step described in the plan of action, and an evaluation process to determine achievement of each steps. Now here's where I'm not dismissing this as not a big deal, but we're not using the book anymore. We have moved to vote, and we are now using a new book for the fall, for next year. So we're completing it for now. By the time the state finishes their inquiry, the school year will be over. Secondly, we're addressing their issue with the process in moving this to policy. So perhaps someone can fill in the blanks here as to why we are beating each other up over this. We all made mistakes, all of us. And I think we need to stand up as a board. We are all culpable. The minutes prove it. If it turns out we were supposed to vote on a pilot and we didn't, we had 2 opportunities to make that happen. We didn't do it. Administration already came forward in December. Mrs. Parks sat at that table. She apologized. She said she should have made the board aware of it earlier. So should have administration. We offered to work with them on this, on how to fix it and correct that communication problem moving forward. What do? Keep dinging people over the head over and over and over again? They took their lumps. Now it's up to us to correct it. We've taken some of the steps that the state board is going to come forward and tell us to do. So while I think this is important, while I think it is appropriate to discuss, I do not think it is appropriate for us to be beating one another up. Mrs. Brand, I apologize.
I would, can I interrupt you for a moment?
And I don't think it's
Members-
appropriate.
can I-
I'm
can I interrupt for a
sorry,
moment?
yes.
Members of the public, this board takes this issue very seriously, but it's clear that we also have different viewpoints on this, just as I'm sure members of the public takes this seriously and have different viewpoints. But it would be very helpful to not have murmurings from the public so that we can complete our discussion. Thank you. Mrs. Iacono, have you done, or do you need to finalize?
Just wanted to wrap up by saying that I really want us to stop right now and think about the students that we represent. Remove the political firestorm that has been put out on this, the witch hunt that has ensued to hang somebody by a noose over this, when in essence we've recognized it. Administration has said that they want to work with us on it. We are putting the steps forward to make that happen. Let's do that, and let's stop beating each other up. It's inappropriate.
Thank you. I do remind the board that while there may be passion around this issue, to try and make sure that the tone and tenor of your comments are speaking to the principal, not to individuals. I'll go to the chair of the committee first, and then Mrs. Brand, you have a comment.
Well, first, while I don't know if we're going to convene into executive session, I certainly invite Mrs. Iacono to join us at Monday's policy meeting if you would like to sit through some of our discussion. It is a treat. But a couple of points regarding, I think, Ms. Iacono, I think it's very valuable to have that reminder about our own discussion. I do think one important thing that prevented us from voting, outright voting the textbook out, is that at that point we were also told by administration that students would now be receiving their prior textbook, which, with the discussions we're having in policy, would have brought us at least back within compliance, so that it wouldn't have brought the attention of the state if that's what we had done initially from August. So that was a part of that conversation. I also think that in terms of the discussion we had at the policy meeting, one very specific language objection we had was anything in any of these memos that pointed to Fairfield having a flawed policy, which Mr. Fadbean alluded to and I did, but that was a central part which I don't think has that needs to be more of a focus here in terms of what we were talking about, that we don't believe it was a flawed policy. That was the cause of this. And to try to find a silver lining to this, this has been an invaluable way for us to form a new policy, whether it's regs or policy. We'll have to take that as a next step, because we certainly know what we don't want a future pilot to look like. So I would like to point to that as a silver lining to this. And also to invite the board, now that you've heard our kind of initial foray into this, anyone who has additional feedback on where we're going, we're very much at infant steps, although we're hoping to take great strides on Monday. We certainly welcome additional feedback on what we compose there. And again, that's in terms of definitions, parameters, when board gets how the board gets involved, and what would be the method of reporting. So it's certainly welcome feedback.
Mrs. Brand and then Mrs. Gerber.
Since we're talking about a very controversial issue, not the least of which is sitting right at the table, but we are dealing with the state, it is a board issue, I would strongly suggest, if the board would please consider inviting the town attorney to address the board, whether it is an executive session or public. I think, given the fact that we have an issue now with the State Board of Ed, I think it's entirely appropriate to ask him to come and speak to us.
Okay. A couple of people have used the word litigation. This is a administrative hearing as preparation for a final recommendation to the State Board of Education relative to hearing. The state has indicated to us that since they have so very few of these, they're in their own mind trying to figure out exactly what the process and procedure is. I take it from conversation from the board tonight that once the state notifies us of the process, what form of response they want from us, that the board would like to be able to have an executive session on that conversation. Do I understand the board correctly? I think it'd be kind of premature to do it now because we really have not received direction from the state as to how they're going to go through the process. But do I understand the board that that's a desire?
I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Right.
What's not an accurate statement?
On the investigation, they lay out the board inquiry pursuant to Section 10-B. It's a very specific procedural they follow. It's not unclear and it's not uncertain. They have a hearing within a certain period of time. The Fairfield Board of Education may present evidence to support its claims. The state may introduce new evidence. There's also a briefing schedule. It's not that unclear. At some point, I think a position is going to have to be taken by the board, and we're going to have to discuss this. And my hope it would be an executive session because I believe it relates to strategy involving a proceeding.
I don't know that what you said and I said disagreed with one another, but because I don't disagree with anything you said, other than what they have typed out. Sometimes they have additional direction that they give you that so that the process is how they want to run it. So that's all. I'm assuming that they're going to give us further definition than beyond what is in their official document. Mr. Carey.
Just to Mrs. Brand's comment, I don't have any objection to having a legal review of this. However, I do have an objection to the choice of who does that. We have a board attorney whose expertise is education law. I'd much prefer to use someone with 30-plus years of education law experience as opposed to, no disrespect to our town attorney, but a political appointee who may or may not have expertise in this area. So I think the idea of having ultimately, as we get down the turnpike here, legal review of this is a good one. I think we should use our board attorney to do that.
I know that Mr. Houston is our official board attorney, and I do know that from time to time, as he feels necessary, he is in consultation with the town attorney, but he does take the lead on board matters, correct? Any other comments that people want to make? Mr. Fadbean. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt? I forgot. My memory is fleeting, I guess. Mrs. Gerber, my apologies.
Is, Mr. Fadbean, is it to this point, or is it to Mrs. Kennelly's?
point.
Okay, then I'll let you go first.
I think it may be advisable for the board perhaps to seek its own counsel that may not be the traditional board attorney. I have some concerns in reading his, well, it was signed by Dr. Tan on the reply to the state's complaint. I have some concerns as to not having seen that before it was filed in the name of the board. I have some concerns as to how the board was represented adequately in that response, and whether the board's interest was represented.
Mrs. Gerber.
Well, this is to Mrs. Kennelly's question about input. Since this is something that is not unique to Fairfield in terms of the fact that a lot of other towns in the state are grappling with similar issues, would it make sense, or have you thought of talking to any other districts in terms of what policies they have in place for piloting, or if they're working through the same issues we are, and how that all works? Or would that be helpful, or would that be too much more?
No, not at all. We talked about that. That was, we got that from a few board members, and Ms. Park, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the concerns was we wanted to make sure it was something that had, passed the test of CABE, and CABE's wording was not overly helpful on this front, and so therefore we weren't immediately looking to the wording of other districts. Can you help me on this again, Ms. Parks? It wasn't just the CABE wording. There was another reason as well, and now I don't have those notes in front of me. And also say a whole other factor here is the notion that the state statutes may be revisited in the very near future, in which case we might have to go right back and look at this policy again. But we, after talking briefly about that, decided we should move ahead with what we're doing, knowing we might have to revisit it based on what the state might do. But
You
Mrs.
directed
Parks?
a question to Mrs. Parks, and then Mr. Liu, and then Mr. Convertito.
Yeah. Yes, what we did was I requested language from CABE specifically related to curriculum and pilots. They sent us what they had, and typically, if they have other districts that they represent who write policy that they believe is in line with the law, they'll send those. They had, when they sent the original documents, they had one document that they had several curriculum policies, but only one that had any pilot language, so I called them back and said, do you have another policy, anything related to pilots? They don't. So my guess is maybe they generally don't put that in policies. I don't know. But they had no other language. So when we talked about it at the policy subcommittee, I suggested a reluctance to reach out to other districts because we want to make sure that it's been tested legally, and that's what CABE does. They give us language that's been tested legally. And we may not get that from another district.
Thank you.
Just one follow-up.
Mr. Liu, do you mind if Mrs. Gerber does a follow-up to that comment? Go ahead.
So I guess this is kind of uncharted waters then, basically, is what you're saying, in that when you asked for the information, there really wasn't anything there.
Correct.
So we're kind of
Charting new territory
Yes.
again.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Liu, and then Mr. Convertito,
Just
and Mrs. Brand.
a couple of points. First one in sort of response to what Mrs. Gerber just said. From everything that I have read here, it's not that everyone's charting new territory. It's because of this we're charting new territory. And the fact remains is that from the things that I read here, from what the state lawyer is saying, is that things like this happen from time to time, but usually they're dealt with through a phone call, and it's over. And what's unfortunate here, and I think this is where possibly Mr. Fadbean and Mrs. Brand have an excellent point, in that it gets very tangled here in trying to understand our role, the superintendent's role, is that instead of the board, which is being sort of slapped with this hearing, instead of the board being able to answer why we decided to let this pilot go on or put this book or change this book, it was the superintendent who answered for us. And so if we had had the opportunity possibly to answer, we might have said, let's stop this right now, we'll end it. But what happened is the superintendent was allowed to answer. He believes he's 100% right, that's his opinion. But he then helped kick this into play. And so I guess I'm also...
Mr. Liu,
No, I'm not
please
finished.
talk to the principal and not to the personalities.
I am. And
No,
so
you are not.
what I'm trying to say is when Mrs. Iacono says we're trying to, the difficulty with this whole issue from its very beginning is that the board was not put into the loop at all. And when the board tried to get information, it was given information this way, that way, this way, this way, it was a this, it was a that. And I believe that that's added to part of the reason why we had such a difficult time deciding whether we should vote on this, how we should stop the math books because we didn't want to upset the kids at this particular point. There were a lot of things in play. And a lot of it was a lot of confusing information. And then what happens as it goes forward is that, again, we're not getting all of this stuff. People are answering for the board, and now we're here. And I'm not trying to go on a witch hunt. What I want to know is I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to make sure that, like Mrs. Kennelly says, this is an opportunity for us to see that this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito, and then I think Dr. Tittle wishes to make a comment.
And I say this with no disrespect to the public. This conversation should be being had in executive session. This is not a policy failure, okay? This is, quite frankly, and I take as much responsibility as anybody else at this table, okay? It is a board failure, okay? And we can point fingers about who responded to this and who responded to that. The fact of the matter is, none of us paid attention to that part of it, okay? And I bear just as much responsibility as anybody else. This is not a policy failure. There is no policy on piloting programs. The state doesn't even have one, okay? And we can go back and forth here, okay? What we need to do is figure out a strategy to make this work, not only for the state, but for the town and for the 900 8th graders, okay, who may or may not, and I don't know what that assessment is, okay, had some issues with this program. This is not, okay, and I'm going to put it on the table now, okay, to put it to rest. I make a motion now to go to executive session to discuss the 10B complaint.
Second.
There's a motion properly made and seconded. Discussion
I
on,
don't believe you can go into executive session because, as Mr. Dwyer said, this is not a matter of litigation. It is an administrative hearing, and therefore you do not have the right to go into.
I appreciate your comment, but you're out of order because this is a discussion among the board. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Is
Thank
just
you.
as a point of order,
Yes.
would the motion be correct to amend the agenda to add an executive session, or can we go directly into executive session in terms of the rules? Not to split hairs, but I just want to make sure that.
No, you can just move
Just
on.
move
The
executive
the
session.
item is already on the agenda, so therefore, having an executive session on an item that has already been posted would
Thank
be
you.
appropriate. Other discussion? Yes, Mr. Liu.
This is something that I had asked you about, so I do wonder if it is appropriate, because I had asked you about this, whether this should go to executive session, and you told me, Mr. Chairman, that this was all in public information and it should be dealt with in the public. So I think we should think carefully about whether we should be going into executive session.
The initial discussion has been in public, but if we're going to get to where we're talking about the lawyer's responses, then perhaps that is an appropriate discussion to have in executive session, as Mr. Convertito has requested. Mr. Fattabine.
I certainly believe it's more appropriate to be discussed in executive session. My only concern is the timing of it. I think it may be more proper to just notice an executive session specifically to address this issue for a future item on an agenda rather than doing it tonight for a variety of potential issues. So I do think it should be an executive session, but it should be properly noticed in the appropriate way.
Mrs. Brand, you have a comment, and then Mr. Convertito.
Actually, I completely agree with Mr. Fataby, and I also think it would give us the opportunity to vet it and make sure that we are acting properly as a board.
Mr. Convertito?
I'm happy to withdraw the motion if we stop the discussion of this issue now.
I would agree. I would agree.
I think everybody has had an opportunity to weigh in on this. We have an agenda that requires already an executive session on 2 topics at the June 2nd regular meeting, so I will look to have a special meeting on this at the appropriate time. Dr. Title.
At the risk of having 14 more board comments after I speak, I have to say something.
Can I ask the board forbearance that we do end the discussion here, let Dr. Title, who has not said anything, make a comment, and then move on to the rest of our agenda items? Thank you.
So let me make, first of all, just a comment that from the very beginning, when this issue came to our attention, that we took the matter very seriously all the way around. I sat here and told you that, and at the January meeting, I told you what steps we were taking to remedy the situation, including what process we were going to use for the final adoption of the textbook that involved a basically completely new review of the books and so forth, and we brought that forward to you, and in April, we also shared with you the results of the pilot that indicated that in the aggregate, students performed as well or better using this textbook as they did with previous algebra students using the other book. Doesn't mean there weren't some students that struggled, but on average, the student achievement levels were right about on par with where they were. In some cases, they were better. But we spent a lot of time on this, on that whole issue of what is the proper textbook to use. I also spent quite a bit of time working with the state to try to resolve this issue. I had absolutely no interest in taking a hardline position to end up in this place, which is why I'm surprised by the comments that this attorney made, since I had several conversations with this attorney and said on more than one occasion, you know, how do we resolve this? I'm always for resolving things. But it kept being, well, this is a formal procedure, we have no choice, you have to go forward, you need to do this. I asked, you know, if the board voted on the book, would that solve the problem? Hem, haw. Answer eventually was, well, no, because it's already in place. How about if the board changes its policy? Well, hem, haw, I'm not really sure. They're in uncharted territory on this. So there were a number of conversations with how can we, you know, take care of this thing. So that's why I was a little surprised about that. I don't want people to think that our entire conversation or entire discussion with the state was contained in that one response. Response was, when we're faced with a legal issue, I consulted with our lawyer, and I said, in your opinion, are we in compliance with this? How can we respond to this? His opinion was, yes, you're in compliance with the statute. I said, fine, tell us how. And so I think it would be instructive, and maybe it's in the executive session or not, I don't know, for you to be able to learn and hear and discuss with the board's lawyer as to why he believes we are in compliance with the statute, and if it gets to a formal process with the state board, then I think that he would be best suited to do that, but that's ultimately the board's decision. So This is not something where it came in, we sent this boilerplate response off, said, we're not listening to you, state, we're not playing ball at all. So I was surprised when I saw the comments, because I do want you to know that, I made, a lot of efforts to resolve this, and once this got to my attention here, obviously, we recognized an issue, and the point was to how do we remedy the situation going forward, and that's where I said, we really need to get some guidance on the policy, because, there's a conundrum about piloting and adopting books. If you do no pilot at all, no field testing at all, whatever you call it, trials, then I think you're subject to some criticism for, well, how do you know it's going to work with us? You're going to commit hundreds of thousands of dollars. What evidence do you have this is going to be effective? If you try to do, and we did this sort of, I guess, then the middle type of pilot would be more like what we saw happen with the elementary textbooks. Right? We did some units from each of the finalists. We brought people in, we gave teachers some training, we did units, we did assessments, we brought them back, and that was part of the decision-making process. And I think we made the board aware that we were doing that and notified people and so forth. The criticism there can be, and again, all of these can be legitimate or not, is, well, wait a minute, you didn't really give it the full-blown treatment. You didn't really have the full training. You really didn't try it for long enough. Right? All of which could be legitimate criticism, because if you've only done a unit, you've only had a little PD, how do you really know? How do you know you're giving it a fair trial? Well, the way to really know is, guess what? Full-blown, everybody gets the PD, you have no commitment beyond a year, and you dig into it. And of course, that has its own set of problems. So therein lies the dilemma, and really we're open to playing it any way that makes sense and get guidance on it. And I think ultimately that's where we want to be, and I think if that's where we end up, then I think that the state will say that the board's addressed the issue, they've got a procedure in place to ensure that any piloting done by the administration comports with the policy, and I think we'd be good to go. So I'd really like us to, certainly focus on as rapidly as possible getting a first reading of this policy back to the board for the June 25th meeting so we can, move it along, and we're happy to work on that. So I think on three different fronts, I think we've taken it, and I do want to say that if, some of my reading of some of the things doesn't agree with the way some board members read that, I get that. And some of my interpretation of this are based on conversations with a lawyer as opposed to what she put, in writing. So I will say I had also reached out to the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, the executive director, who was a former superintendent, and I said, here's the situation. What do you think? He said, that's a local decision. That should not be the business of the state, and he believes that if the strict interpretation of the statute, that every change, no matter how small, has to go to the board for approval, there's lots of boards in trouble in the state. And so there's an interest in this all the way around. So we've been putting a lot of effort into this on a lot of different fronts, and so I don't want to leave the impression that on the substance of it or on the resolution of it that we're not taking it seriously. And I hear what you're saying.
Thank you. I think each of us have had an opportunity to comment, and we will move forward with an executive session to talk about the next legal response to the hearing whenever that time frame makes sense, and we'll have it as a separate meeting. We'll move on now to the superintendent's report.
Well, this is anticlimactic.
It's not only update on district initiatives, but as I mentioned to the public earlier, Dr. Title will also make comments on security.
Well, believe it or not, we have been doing things other than math this year. So let me talk about security, but in this context. This has really been an unbelievable year. The prior issue aside, we really had 5 unbelievable events happen this year, from about July 15th until the middle of February. The PCB discovery at Osborne Hill and all that entailed, Hurricane Sandy, The Sandy Hook incident, the roof at Ludlow blowing off, and the biggest blizzard in the history of Connecticut, Nemo. Other than that, it was pretty uneventful. But with respect, so I talk about security in relation to Sandy Hook first, and I'm not going to go through all the other natural disasters that we dealt with this year, but I do think that, you know, enormous amounts of administrative leadership time across the district were spent on those issues. And if that meant we took our eye off the ball on some other things, you know, that may be it. But immediately after the Sandy Hook, you know, we did install doorbells immediately and instituted a policy of locking all doors during the school day, the exception at the high schools, where we've established a visitor station at the main entrance of the high schools to control visitor access. We've been working very closely with the police department on improving our security. They had 2 sessions with our school leaders to discuss active and proactive moves. We've been taking their advice. We've been working with them as they conduct their security audits of all the schools. We expect those to be done by the end of July. And so we'll then be able to formulate a game plan at that point as to where to move forward from there. We've also installed, you may have seen some additional front door signage to direct people to the new airphone system, to direct people into one door, which in many cases then people are led by sort of gallery ropes into the office, so that people, if they're going to wander off, they really have to go out of their way to do so. Additional signage on the interior doors of a lot of schools, particularly, for example, at Ward High School, where there are so many exterior doors, a sign that tells people, do not let people come into these doors, direct them to the main office. We had several exterior doors that were marginal, that were replaced, and we've really upgraded our communication with the police, and making sure that all of our communication devices are working as intended. We have some additional potential security measures that we are researching with the police. Funds permitting this year, we'll try to make, you know, a move on some of those. We did work cooperatively with the police department to try to put together a package for additional security personnel. We know through the public budget discussion that that was not fully funded, but there is approximately $125,000 in police overtime allocated to additional security personnel for the schools for the 13-14 school year, and we'll continue to work with the police department on a package of security proposals that may include a combination of infrastructure, training, and personnel going forward. So this is something we spent another considerable amount of time on, but I can't get into a whole lot more detail than that. That's where we are on security.
Any comments or questions from the board on that topic? Mrs. Brand.
Just, I think that what there was the suggestion, they've been extremely thorough, very diligent, have done a tremendous amount of work that we may not be able to tell the community about. But there was also another pitch with this, that it will be an all-out community effort as opposed to just police intervention.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's
Any other
good.
comments? Yes, we have been well served by our local police department on this matter.
And I'll say, you know, working, you know, cooperatively with our staff, Sal Morbido, Tom Cullen, really done a lot of due diligence on this, and we're still hopeful we can do more, but again, it may end up being more of a larger capital project. In the discussion of Riverfield and Ludlow at the Board of Finance meeting, that came up. So they're almost expecting something to come down the pike. And we do have some headroom in our long-range facilities plan to try to make that happen. And I do want to, I'm not going to go through every one of the district-wide initiatives. I do want to say, and Tom Cullen's off today, but we completed virtually all of the major maintenance and capital projects. You know, we worked so hard to get those through the town, and sometimes you forget what happens to them. And you know, I'm really happy to say that every one of the projects that went through on the capital non-recurring list is either complete or very close to complete, and they're all at or under budget. And that means that in some cases, the town will be saving some money they would have otherwise had to bond. Some of these will sound familiar, but this is like a walk down memory lane. This year, we completed the restoration project of 5 elementary school roofs. Remember the famous roof project? The warranty project, Osborne, Riverfield, Holland Hill, North Stratfield, and Sherman. So $725,000 project was completed for $681,000. And they've held up beautifully in the rain. Tomlinson Middle School facade and cornice doors, remember that whole project with that whole thing? We're almost done. The final door painting will happen when school is out. That project was budgeted at $250,000. We're still waiting for the final pricing. It looks like it's going to come in around $200,000. Tomlinson Middle School, we were replacing some flooring. If you remember that project was completed. That had some asbestos tiles that were coming up. It was a $133,000 project, completed for $110,000. The traffic project at Tomlinson, remember that one? $150,000 project. We've done all of the front work on that, but if you remember, there was a second phase to that, which is to do some paving and turnaround of the lower lot. So that will be done over the summer with some drainage. So we think that's still going to come in at around the $150,000, what we spent about $100,000 so far. The Jennings bathrooms were in this year. Those were done. The Dwight boilers, after all of that, $294,000 budgeted, completed for $290,000. And 8 oil tanks, underground oil tanks, were replaced. All we have to do is finish some final paving off at Jennings. $250,000 project, final cost looks like to be about $225,000. So I think that is a success. Sometimes we get dinged on, you know, how close are you on the pricing, you know, and so forth, but, you know, every one of them has worked out well. So, you know, while we were dealing with a lot of these catastrophes, we really did get a lot of other initiatives done. I just want to highlight a few on this list, and I'll be happy to take questions on anything that's on here, even if I don't talk about it. Probably the biggest thing in technology this year is the beginning of the cutover to Infinite Campus, removing 5 or 6 legacy programs and replacing them with a comprehensive system. Year 1 implementation was, of course, not without its glitches, but it's being rolled out. I will say that Nancy Burns and Karen Parks took the lead on this with a whole bunch of other people, and, you know, we'll be continuing to expand it. You saw some of the benefit of that in the budget, because we took out a bunch of software costs that we had been paying for these others. So I just want to highlight that as we made good progress there, and I'm hoping the parents will begin to use it more and see the benefits of it. There's even an app. So if it comes with an app, then you know it's going to be good. The school climate teams did a lot of work this year. If you remember, this is the year of the survey. The schools were very serious about reviewing the survey, looking for trends, coming up with a common protocol and documents around bullying and that whole part. Every school now includes, and this is part of school improvement planning, includes in it a whole strand on climate and what the schools are going to do for climate. So they've used the data from the survey, they're developing action plans, and it's an integral part of school improvement work, which ensures it will be ongoing. And number 15, that work with data teams, has really made advancements this year. Every school is working hard on it. There's a school-wide data team functioning in every school, and lots of schools have either departmental or grade-level data teams that are digging down into the data, coming up with ideas for improvement, and this will all play out when they revise their school improvement plans in the fall. You know, this was a passion of mine. I actually observed and gave feedback to every data team in the district this year. Instructional Rounds, which is teachers visiting and administrators visiting classrooms, other people's classrooms, and giving feedback throughout the district on the initiatives. So if a school is working on, say, increasing rigor in its classrooms, then groups of teachers and administrators go in to that school and they look and they give feedback to the school on how well they're doing on it. Every school identifies an area they're working on, and then instructional rounds is the way that we see whether or not this is actually happening in classrooms. And we did a lot of professional development on that this year that I think people found it very helpful. School improvement planning, I talked about, that is continuing to be refined, and people are getting better at that. I do want to say, just on the finance side, although it's not really listed here, it's under budget process, that the fact that we were able to bid this health insurance, starting in July, when we saw the trending going south, and start that process with Doreen and her staff, is an incredibly cumbersome process. And the results of that meant that this year, when we got down to the end of the budget, that was $843,000 that we didn't have to sit here and find cuts for in programs and personnel. And the rollout of that has gone very well, and you know, it's not a risk-free proposition. I just want to point that out. The bus contracts on there, that pales in comparison to the changing out your health insurance. But the direct impact of that work is that $843,000 on our side was preserved. The town also benefited from that, even though they didn't change carriers. So it was over $1 million in savings to the town. Curriculum, we know all about that. You do know that we pushed off the language arts. You'll be getting that next year. Racial imbalance, I think you saw, you know, it's hard to remember some of these things. They happened in the fall, and they feel like 100 years ago. But we tweaked the racial imbalance plan. The board approved the racial imbalance plan. We submitted to the state board. It was approved by the state board, and then, again, this is not cause and effect, but a continuation of our plan was that we were within racial balance this year in April for the first time in a while. 33, well, you know how much work that was, that teacher and administrator evaluation plan. That's an enormous move forward, and I think the big thing there is going to be, you know, developing the capacity to really implement that with fidelity. That's going to be extremely difficult, but just getting, you know, the teachers, administrators in the room, and Ann Leffert gets kudos along with some other folks, Karen in the central office, Karen Parks, for really driving that, but also the teacher leaders that were part of that, and the teachers union that was part of that. I know it's controversial. And the last one I'll just talk about is the funding requests. Sherman was not really pushed forward because that really was off in the hands of the first selectman, because there was a committee, they finished that project, but, you know, Osborne Hill, that was extremely difficult to go through, and a tremendous amount of work was put into it over the summer and forward, but at the end of the day, that started as a window project, a simple window project. At the end of the day, not only do we have the money for the window project and clean up the PCBs, but all of the expenses that we incurred, over $800,000, to clean that up in the current year, the town also has reimbursed us for, which meant that that $800,000 that we spent for Osborne didn't have to come out of somebody else's hide during the current year. But that project has a building committee and is moving forward. That's not the path I'd like to see these other projects go, but it did end up, and obviously there's still work to be done on that, but that was good. You know, we're right there. We're at the RTM on Riverfield, and we're at the RTM on Ludlow High School. The one added thing was obviously at Ludlow High School, we knew we were going to propose the renovation and the windows. The roof replacement was the wild card there due to the little problem we had there. So those are the things I wanted to highlight, just because, you know, we get bogged down in some things. We dealt with 5 incredible events this year that took enormous amounts of time away, and, you know, I'm really proud of a lot of the progress we made on these district-wide initiatives. They're very aggressive, probably overly aggressive, and in some cases you can see some things are still, you know, in progress. I think I'm going to have to bring you a shorter list for next year, because I think implementing teacher and administrative evaluation may be in bold across the top, but I did want to point out to you and to the public that there was a lot going on this year, and you to the extent that you weren't aware of it, I hope this refreshes your memory. Thank you, and for listening. Notice I haven't done a superintendent's report for like 3 meetings, so I was saving my time for this one, because I really wanted to make sure people knew the progress we'd made on some of these fronts. So I'm open to any questions or comments.
Fair enough. Mrs. Brand, you have a question or a comment?
Unfortunately, I have like a page full, so I'll try and limit it as much as I can, because I know it's getting late. We have another meeting. Do we have a time frame or a date set that we're going to get a presentation from the firm that did the study about the PCBs and how we're supposed to address it as a district?
Yeah, we are going to, what we did with that was, and that was all related to Osborne Hill.
Right.
Right, so in addition to, I'm glad you brought that up, because in addition to dealing with Osborne Hill as a singleton, we also went out and engaged the town bodies with, hey, this is a town-wide issue that needs to be addressed. And so we've asked the consultants who did the initial study to do some follow-up work based on some questions we had and some additional requests from certain schools. So we're going to get some additional follow-up from them, work done, some additional analysis, and we're also going to implement some of their suggestions over the summer in terms of stuff our people can do. And I would say by the fall, we'd be ready to have a further discussion. But I also think it's a discussion that needs to happen not just at the board level, because this is a town-wide issue, and if there's cost implications for this, the whole town needs to be on board with the direction we're going in. We started it that way, we need to continue it that way. So by the fall, we'll have a better handle on the full scope of it. But I really need to get Jeff Hamill back here. It's not something that Tom Cullen can handle.
Yeah, I am actually. So
Yep.
you're not looking at the June 25th, you're
No,
looking at
we won't be
September
ready.
doing a presentation? The other thing I was looking at, you had a rollout of student success plans.
Yes.
Again, could we have a presentation or at least a sample of what that might look like for, I'd like as a board member to see what that looks like.
Sure.
I look at some of these, and one of the ones that I know there were concerns, we had a rollout with something that we knew was going to be challenging to begin with, and that was Infinite Campus. There were several issues that arose from that, and they were about, getting third quarter grades, the GPA, attendance, if we're really being able to track whether students are able to be in a class and how that is working out, because that does have implications for graduation requirements. Do you anticipate those kinks being worked out for the fall?
Yes, it's Karen, it's implementing this is all about ironing out kinks.
Well, that's
right.
right.
And the interesting thing is that one of the things with a new student management system is it kind of forces you to standardize things. And as you go into this, you often find that, you want the program to do what you're doing, and you find that, geez, maybe the 3 middle schools are doing something different, and we need to have a conversation about how we're all going to be on the same page about that, and that takes a little time to get to. So I think it's actually forcing us to make some decisions and be more consistent with a lot of our practices. That's going to be ongoing. I mean, Infinite Campus is not a, 6 months and you're done kind of a thing. I think that's a 2 to 3 year process, and more features will be brought on board as we move forward, and, we can update you as we go along with how we're doing on that.
The last, I have more, I can mail them in, but there was one, as you know, that's near and dear to my heart, which is the world language curriculum to reflect staffing levels. Could we please see what the revised one, or what the changes have been from one to the other? And honestly, given our recent discussion, does that change also need to come for a vote to the board? It's just, you don't need the answer right now.
Okay.
It was just something I wanted to
That's
put out
item
there.
number 28.
Correct.
All right.
Thank you.
Other board members' comments, Mr. Carey, or questions?
Mostly comments, Mr. Dwyer. So we started in the last year and rolled into this year with a new nemesis, this PCB problem at Osborne Hill. And our team assembled quite an impressive array of experts, from our local health experts to the EPA to the state health experts, to help us all understand, help themselves understand what we were facing. Brought in outside consultants, and I think was very proactive in working with the community And I want to make sure that we recognize that effort, because we're definitely in a very different place right now at that school than we were at this time last year. And the implications of that could have been very serious. So I'm very thankful for all our team's efforts there. The school year started with a hurricane. We were fortunate none of our schools flooded, but it ended up that we were using one to house members of our community. We were feeding people who were in that emergency center, and our custodial staff was helping to clean the police and fire department. Everyone was pitching in because it was a very dire situation. So once again, our team stepped up and really met the challenge. One day, a few months back, a roof blew off one of our schools. It almost seemed normal at this point that something like that might happen, but rearrange the entire school and get everyone back in it as quickly as we did and get that issue resolved was also something that demands accolades. I can't tell you how thankful I am for this. We can't get into a lot of detail of, obviously, the briefing we got on security, but Sandy Hook has changed our world. And I can tell you, without getting specific, that our team has been working relentlessly, as well as our police department, to ensure the safety and security of our children, which is our paramount goal. We give them to our district for 6.5 hours a day, 182 days a year. The expectation is, first and foremost, that they're kept safe. We're very fortunate that we have the level of attention we do on this issue in this town, that we have an incident response expert as the chief of police who has exceptional expertise in this area, and that we have an excellent relationship with our police department between our team, our staff, and the police department. So I'm very thankful for all those things. In addition, in terms of Infinite Campus, I can just give you one parent's experience. Having had to roll out ERP and CRM systems at scale in the private sector, I know it's a big challenge. However, this is a phenomenal tool. Got it right here on my phone. Hour after the spring concert, my son's grade popped right up on my phone. Saw what he got for the concert. So we have a very diligent teacher over at one of the middle schools. I won't name her, but it is a phenomenal tool to increase communication. And it really is something that I'm hoping that we can hear a little bit more about, or maybe have a presentation about sometime in the future, because I really think that the potential here for this is great. It is something that lets you know what's going on with your students in every class, when you need to call the teacher, when the story at home isn't exactly what's going on at school, and you get kind of a advanced warning so you can head things off before there's a problem. So I'm very impressed with what we have so far, and I'm surprised to hear there's kinks. I haven't experienced them yet myself, but I'm excited to see how that develops. So thank you very much for all your efforts.
Other comments, Mrs. Gerber? And then Mrs. Kennelly?
Yeah, I had a question. Number 27, the kindergarten program review. Now that we're all full day, does that mean that there'll be a change in the kindergarten curriculum? Since I just remember back in the day when I used to fight to keep extended day kindergarten, there was always the debate, well, it's an extended day curriculum even though the kids go full day, and there was just some confusion about that. I didn't know if that was something that was going to need to be changed. I mean, at this stage in the game, I guess everyone is pretty much going full day anyway, but,
Right.
But had the curriculum actually been changed, or will it have to be now that everyone is officially full day? Or, I mean, because actually everyone's full day 5 days now, so there isn't
Correct.
even the Wednesday half day.
Do you want to say
I just
anything
was
about this,
curious.
Anna?
Thanks.
Wearing out here.
With that smile on your face, you
Right,
seem
she's looking for a
anxious to be
chance
able to do this.
Talk about it.
I was so disappointed in January when you just kind of flew it through that I couldn't talk to you about kindergarten, so here's my moment. No, we won't require a curriculum change for the full-day program because the committee that worked on this looked specifically to not expand curriculum, but to allow more flexibility to implement the very large curricula that exists at the kindergarten level, as well as provide for some time for that piece on social emotional development that has honestly been squeezed out of kindergarten because of the increasing demands academically. So simply, no, there won't be a change to curriculum, but more time to implement that as well as provide social emotional development time.
And I guess just one other question, because I know the Wednesday afternoons were always when the teachers would be able to meet, so I guess they're just doing that after school now, or how does that work?
No, we'll provide them with a contractual 150 minutes of planning time through special area scheduling for students, PE, music, art.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mrs. Connelly.
Just one quick follow-up on that. First of all, I'm thrilled to hear that. I was very concerned that we were going to use this as an opportunity to heap more on them, and I think that for what will be a few 4-year-olds and 5 and up to 6, that would be disastrous. I'd also hope I know some parents had asked me about, is this focus on curriculum going to be affecting recess? And as minor as that may seem, they were getting some buzz that they were just going to be going with the one recess, and I would hope that the administration would stand behind it. They certainly need that time, that they'd be having at least 2. So I just wanted to toss that out there. I didn't know if that was part of a conversation, or if, as far as you know, that would be district-wide.
Standard 2 recesses for primary grades is not a policy per se. It is a practice when students need it, is the elementary agreement on that. So it's not necessarily scheduled 2 recesses every day for every kindergarten across the district. Teachers have the flexibility to schedule in a second recess. So yes, we won't be banning that, but it won't be mandated either.
You have another question?
Yes, but thank you. 3 points I wanted to ask through the chair to Dr. Title. First, with the school climate teams, and I apologize, I'm so positive
Be
I brought this.
helpful if you number them.
Sorry, I'm number 7.
Get there
Yes.
quicker.
I'm betting this came up during budget time, but since this is where this is coming up again, I was wondering how the school climate teams managed in terms of, did they get the anticipated number of referrals? Were there large numbers? And with the idea towards the staffing of these, because that was a huge concern when we were, entering into this. How did that staffing go? And I was also wondering about the second part, because I thought there had been some talk of trying to come up with a means for anonymous referrals. And so those are my 2 questions on number 7.
I'll let my local expert answer.
Well, it's hard to gauge whether or not we had a large number of referrals after only 1 year, because we don't have anything to compare that to. And if you remember, our goal is to see, we actually expect to see an uptick in referrals in the first few years as students and families become more well-versed in the policy and begin to engage in the process of becoming bystanders and allies versus, allies versus bystanders to the whole process of that mean-spirited bullying kind of behavior. So the data, I don't want people to look at it as the numbers of referrals equals bad or good. It is simply a piece of information that we need to understand, and then understand patterns of the kinds of things that are being reported, and continuing to work with the students on improving school climate, and also work with the staff on reporting more than not reporting. Those are things we continue to work on, and the school climate teams at each building continue to work on. With regard to anonymous reporting, all of the buildings have a mechanism for anonymous reporting within the building. One of the things we're still looking at different ways to look at electronic anonymous reporting, which has a lot of controversial elements to it. So we're taking it slow. We want to make sure that if we go to that kind of, that process of anonymous electronic reporting, that there's a mechanism to make sure we can follow up on false reports and things that just drag, that drag administrators and people out into the investigations that aren't really viable. People using it as a weapon. Right. Actually a bullying tool, quite frankly. So we're really taking that one step at a time. This year was the first year out, so it's just the beginning.
Right. I guess when I asked the number, obviously I knew you'd have nothing to compare it to, but I meant it more in the context of the staffing of it, that simply put, that they were able to handle the number of referrals. I completely agree that actually an uptick in referrals would be an indication of success, that the lines of communication had been opened. But the point being that the staffing as we have it now was able to handle the numbers.
Yes, we did, the staff at the buildings did what they needed to do to meet both the letter and the spirit of the policy. I will say, though, that what we've learned is that an investigation often takes far longer and far more resources than you would expect. It's not a simple couple of interviews and you're done. It usually takes a lot longer to really resolve something, to make sure that students aren't the targets of mean-spirited behavior. So we're learning a lot in that investigation process. When we see the investigations come through and then follow up, we're learning a lot about what it takes to do a thorough investigation.
Okay, thank you. My second question was about number 11, they implement the revised gifted model, and wondering if, I know the parents weren't asked for feedback this year, but were the students? I know last year they were, this year with what they were trying, especially at the middle school, I know it was
Meg,
quite
you know,
a
middle
different
school?
program.
The 8th grade students were asked for feedback on the 8th grade spring seminar that we offered to the gifted students. The rest of the program, the opportunity for students to take part in specific units that the teachers developed, an independent study, we did not, but we could certainly do that before the end of the school year.
Okay. I just always think it helps to sell the, if we can have the kids' own words. It was just one thought, because again, I know we've done it the previous year. Thank you. My last question through the chair to Dr. Title was regarding the Plato software, and that completed.
That's number 19.
Sorry, number 19. I know that was something we'd always talked about. I didn't realize actually the extent of the implementation for this year. That takes me by surprise, and I was wondering if you could tell us how some of the pros and cons went with that, because obviously there's a lot of potential there, and wondering how it went with these groups.
I don't know if I can talk to all of them. Who wants to try this? Mrs. Parks. You know, this has worked out really well. All of your questions have landed on a different person's expertise, so no one is feeling left out. And this spans a couple people's, because it's not just Mrs. Parks' responsibility, but maybe you can describe it generally.
Yeah, we've had, as in anything else, when we implement it, we started it in one way, and then we were getting feedback from kids that they might need more support. So we now actually have, for homebound students, it's a blend of using Play-Doh and also using tutoring, which is the only thing we used to have was tutoring. And, there's a lot of problems there with things back and forth from the classroom to the student, back and forth. So Play-Doh acts in many ways like the instructor. But they were all, I think, generally procedural. We're still collecting data to see how it's going, and we hope to expand the use even further. Maybe as we hope to use it much more extensively next year as an intervention in the high schools, because it's really hard to do interventions in high schools, but if students, for example, can go to if they have a study hall and want to go to a computer lab and can go through Play-Doh and brush up on maybe some pieces they're missing in their course, or just reinforce. So I think it's working. It hasn't had no bumps in the road, but we've been working on them as we roll it out and get feedback from the students using it. That answers your question.
Yes? Okay. Mr. Constantino.
Just briefly, first, let me commend Dr. Title and staff on completing 38 new district initiatives in the year that we've had. The one model that has always intrigued me, and I think the board could benefit from seeing a presentation on, whether it be in the fall, whatever, is 15 in conjunction with 17, the data teams and the school improvement strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And if, my request through the chair would simply be if we could see some actual data and/or presentation on an actual, model and how
Sure.
that's worked and so forth in the fall, I'd appreciate it.
So let me understand this. You're wondering if Dr. Title is willing to talk about data? And how many hours are you going to allocate to that? But yes, we will get that on the agenda.
Maybe we'll show you a video.
Mr. Liu, did you have your hand up or not? No?
Can I just comment on the
Mrs.
data?
Iacono,
Sure.
and then Mrs. Brand.
Just to that point, through the chair to Mr. Convertito, had the great benefit of sitting in as a parent at Riverfield with Mrs. Anziano's new, she did an entry plan coming into the building and following all the steps that Dr. Title has outlined for administration and the things that they're supposed to follow. And it was not only interesting to see as a parent, but I will tell you as a board member, it was really fascinating to sit there and watch an administrator actually doing everything that we here at the table, Dr. Title, talk about. Okay, well, here's where we started, here's what we did, and here's in charge of this. And so I think it's an excellent idea. I'm glad you brought it up. And I did get to see a piece of it in person at Riverfield, and it was sounding like a geek, but really cool.
Thank you. Mrs. Brand. And is this the last comment so that we can move to other agenda items, or does anybody else have comments? Mrs. Brand, you have the last comment.
Yeah, it's number 36, developing leasing options for central office, alternative high school, and maintenance facilities. It's in progress with the town. Number one, when is the central office contract up, and what other options are we looking at? And I guess my concern is the alternative high school are we looking at the same site? Are we looking at changing that? I wanted to know what that meant. I know we're looking for maintenance and where to have a storage facility, but and there may be a problem with asking the question. I am very aware that there may be some strategies in terms of leasing and where you're going, but
Yeah,
I think where you're going is really more what I'm concerned about, particularly with the alternative high school.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if I knew what the other alternatives to the alternatives might be, I don't think it would be wise to share them, obviously for strategy purposes, but the central office lease, I believe, expires June 30th, 2015. And there's some window of time for the, it's actually not a lease. I should be clear about that. It's a condominium arrangement. And the owner, who owns the rest of the building, has an option to buy the town out, with the thought that in the event that that option were exercised, the town then would have a pot of money to relocate the central office somewhere. So we haven't pursued any other alternatives for central office, but it wouldn't be something where we'd be caught high and dry because there'd be a pot of money available to it. I know with the maintenance one, we just went through that last year and got that lease approved by the town. So that's got a few more years to run on it. And alternative high school, I'm not sure about. I know that in the most recent iteration of that particular lease, there's an option to purchase that facility that could be exercised, but that would take town, action on it. So I think that's sort of an ongoing communication between Tom and people at the town, but it's been a bit on the back burner because I think both of them have a little time to run.
With that in mind, does it require any board action, particularly relative to requesting? We request additional space. Does it, if it's going to be a purchase, would it again require board? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think if we're going to move in that direction, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the board comments. Of course, during the following executive session, we'll go into more detail on the initiatives and through Dr. Title's superintendent evaluation. Back to the policy, let's see, back to the policy committee for the first readings of policies, which hopefully we can do fairly quickly.
I hope so as well. I don't really intend to talk at length, except simply to point out that what we're proposing is the language of Policy 5112 with the other three, 5115, 7, and 8, proposed for deletion because they're all being subsumed within 51112. I don't believe it requires an awful lot of explanation. A lot of this was coming into compliance with the state in terms of various definitions. but I'll just open it up to the board if there are any questions regarding the language.
Mrs. Brand. Mrs. Brand.
I'm trying to figure out, not your first page, not your second page, your third page, where it starts with truancy. There's a sentencing or other person having control of the child. Is that the legal language? Because I think there are a lot of parents that would like to have control of a child, but I don't know that we're able to do that. So I wondered if perhaps we wanted to consider changing it to guardianship, responsibility for. You get my point. I mean, when I looked at that, I just thought we really don't have control. But I wanted to ask, in fact, if that was the legal language.
And it was, in fact, the language. Again, the idea being of caretakers
Right.
who, grandma, grandpa, whomever.
Okay.
But point taken.
More or less, you have to talk to your congressman on that, I
No, I'm
guess.
just laughing, thinking they're very optimistic then. All right, thanks.
Any other questions from board members on the first reading of the policy? If not, the policy will be put on the agenda for action at the, this one for action to adopt, and the other three that Mrs. Kennelly mentioned for deletion. Okay. In front of you, I placed a document that talked about the discussion for planning for the 2014-15 budget review process. When we adopted this goal in October, some comments were made around a multi-year budget forecast or targeting an annual budget growth number, having more time for the budget discussion, and you see the list in front of you. We have this meeting, the next meeting, and August meeting, I would think, to give any direction on changes that we would like to see in the budget development process. This would be similar to the communications, I think. The Mission and Goals Committee has a very clear bring back a document that's a policy. Communications was think about it and talk about it and come up with some recommendations. This was also one of those goals that didn't really have a clear statement of what we're trying to accomplish. And so I lay this in front of the board just as a reminder as to the discussion that had been held at different times over the course of this past year. I did hear from Jessica. This was typed up, and I wasn't at my computer when I got the last one. So, Mrs. Kennelly, you have another thought that you'd want to add to this list. And then in the interest of the hour, I would suggest that board members take this list and that we either add to it because I've put it in front of you and you forgot to send me something, or so that we can kind of settle on this at least by August, if not June. Mrs. Kennelly.
So what I was proposing would be item number 8, that there be a board work, and I don't know how the phrasing of this would be, but should there be a cut to the budget, that there be room for a special meeting, basically a board work session between being presented with the superintendent's recommendations for cuts and the meeting where we take the vote. And I say that in the interest of, I think more of our discussion needs to be in the public, because I think there are many ideas that we have that if it's all taken care of behind closed doors, the public is therefore not privy to it, and also therefore not privy to many of Dr. Title's explanations for what he would and would not advise, and I think it's helpful for the public to hear that. So that's the idea of, so this would be in May of a public work session between receiving the superintendent's proposed amendments and then the board vote.
I want to clarify your statement and see if you agree with it. You did not mean to imply that the board met in private session to discuss the cuts prior to their being made public.
No, but what I do mean, which the public is well aware of, is when we make reference to having conversations or tossing ideas out to Dr. Title, but that's not as a full board, correct?
Correct, not as a full board. So the public knows that each board member has the ability to communicate individually any ideas or thoughts they have regarding the school district, and then the superintendent takes that under advisement. We only act as a board when we're convened in session. Mrs. Brand.
The only issue I see here is a specific time. I'd like us to do it start in August. It's when we reconcile what's happened with the budget the previous year, when we get a financial report, and I think that's a great opportunity to analyze how the past year went and what the implications would be for the coming year. To me, that would help us in terms of knowing what we've just done and what we had to fix or transfers, then moving forward, things that may jump out or considerations at that time. We'd also have our kindergarten numbers, I think, pretty well in at that point in time, too.
And you're talking about the reconciliation for the prior year's
Yes.
accounts?
Yes.
Which I think sometimes is done and available by August, and other times really not available till September. It depends on when the finance department can
Well, the
tidy that
closeout,
up.
usually, we do have that, because they had to finalize that. in
Yeah, we
case-
do take a vote on, what's the meeting that we take a vote on the budget
one.
reconciliation? Next meeting?
Next meeting.
Yeah.
By July 1st.
And so
Transfers.
the transfers are done at the next meeting, but till you close out the fiscal year and they issue a final report, that's sometimes in either August or September, I think.
Right,
And so that's what you're referring to?
Right, I think
that
if we can
document.
do it sooner, it would be better, I think, but I think that would be a good way to start.
Any other comments that people want to make to add to the list? Mr.
Just a
Carey.
clarification, Mr. Chair, that I believe from your introduction to the subject that we're going to have a couple more bites of the apple to discuss this downstream, so I just wanted to make sure that's going to take place, and if that's the case, I'll defer to then.
Okay, and for those of you who say, I see the kernel of my idea here, but it doesn't seem to capture it, feel free to comment at the next meeting. You know, even item number 4, which I put on as I quickly looked at typing it, you know, that really is aligning our budget with our priorities and goals, is what I mean. We need to be able to do that and then measure it accordingly. We will not be doing all 9 of these things probably for the next fiscal year, because some of them probably will take more discussion, and it may be that a majority of the board is not in favor of going in one direction or another. All I tried to do was capture individual thoughts. This does not reflect, at the moment, the total board's thoughts. With no further comments on that, we go to public comments and petitions. I remind members of the public that they have 2 minutes, if they wish, on topics of interest to them. I see one person. In the interest of my being able to schedule time, how many people do I have? If you could stand up next to the wall, I would appreciate it. I see 3. If there's more than 3, I would appreciate it if you would get up there so I have a sense. Please, your name and address, please.
I'm Dawn Llewellyn, 524 Sturgis Road. I first want to preface it by saying no one's on a witch hunt. Parents just want transparency and communication. We were excluded from the process of the textbook selection. The facts are clear that initially the district had fully intended to implement this textbook for our curriculum under the guise of the Common Core. This is evident in the fact that prior to December, it was not called a pilot. This is evident because it was rolled out across the entire district in every Algebra 1 class without a control group. This is evidence because no metrics or benchmarks were established up front. When did it become a pilot? It became a pilot when the district realized they violated state statutes of an unimproved textbook by a 2/3 vote. Here we are at the end of the school year, having lived with this textbook. Currently, several classes at Tomlinson and Woods are having difficult times with Chapter 8 and 9 of the textbook. Students are retaking algebra tests. Some classes have been told to bring their tests home over the weekend to take it a second time. Tests are getting easier for some reason. All along, numerous people tried to tell the district the textbook and teaching methodology were not working for our students. You as a board confirmed this at the last meeting when CPM was not even considered for next year's adoption. The district has not provided the public with a complete statistical analysis of the alleged pilot. Actually, no hardcore data has been shared with the public. I don't understand when Dr. Title states the students' scores are on par or better than last year. If you remember, I shared a statistical analysis by Superintendent Dr. Tenbush in Illinois, and it showed the students failed after 2 years of CPM. I'm trying to find out where our statistical analysis is, our benchmarks that we used in the beginning of the year, and how we did at the end of the year. And I'm hoping that the board will be able to ask the administrators and get that information and put it publicly on the Fairfield website. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And Mrs. Llewellyn, you're doing very much better because you were exactly on time.
I have to tell you that the state board, they actually listened even though we went over the 3 minutes. It was quite amazing.
Thank you.
They were attentive. Yeah.
Please state your name and address.
I brought my own timer. So give me a second. Tonight, I'm Trudy Durrell, 64 Woodcrest Road, and tonight I am speaking to you as co-PTA president of Holland Hill School. I need to speak briefly to the board about concerns regarding the overtime and rental fees that were voted at the last meeting, and the letter which came out dated June 6 from Tom Cullen's office. My PTA colleagues and I at Holland Hill and at several other schools were disheartened, disappointed, and deeply frustrated with the lack of clear and effective communication regarding facility use and potential fees, especially at this particular time of year when PTAs are planning and approving their budgets, and some of them have actually already done that, and the lack of clarity created a sense of urgency and, honestly, panic. So my request is for a written clarification of the document regarding the rental fees, and very specific language as to which groups will be charged, and the specific times at which those charges will be assessed, and specific date at which these regulations will go into effect. And I urge central office and our Board of Ed moving forward to perhaps have documents that affect PTAs who honestly help support your educational process, vetted with PTA council leadership, so that we can provide as clear as document as possible in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please state your name and address. And while you're coming up, the administrative regulations to implement our budget decision are nearing completion, and hopefully that document will be available shortly. State your name and address, please.
Nancy Haberly, 30 Duck Farm Road. Every taxpayer in Fairfield is paying for a top-notch education for the children of Fairfield, but none of us are on the receiving end of that deal, especially the children. With litigation pending, we all understand that rules and laws are in place for a reason. If the children in school don't play by them, they pay the price. We all need to play fair and stop playing games. All of this comes at far too high cost educationally and economically. For nearly 3 years now, our district has taken a turn for the worse. The interests of politics have taken a front seat to education in Fairfield. Programs, teaching staff, paraprofessional staff have been cut to shreds for the past 2 years plus, yet central office staff continues to grow. I want to name a few of the most recent cuts our schools have incurred. World languages, elementary school 5th grade music program, reduced after-school buses for middle schools, completely cut after-school buses for the high schools. Our district has lost 26 administrators, principals, and vice principals. Pay to play, raising parking fees for the students at the high schools. 4th grade assured program was cut. Closed media centers at the high school, and reduced staff and hours at the library at the high school. That's just to name a few. Responsible solutions need to be put into place to end this continuance of program cutting every time there is a shortfall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please state your name and address.
Hello. Sorry, my voice is going. Kelly Crisp, 194 Paper Mill Lane. When we reflect on the use of the CPM textbook, we should remember that all this could have and should have been avoided as early as last May. Parents made central office and the board aware of their concerns about CPM as early as October. As you know, we worked very hard to educate central office and the board about our concerns prior to filing a complaint with the state. Had central office properly vetted the CPM textbook, the state would not have been investigated the textbook or ordered a hearing because the book would not have been in use. As you know, the book was not recommended after being properly vetted this May. I hope that in the end of the process, Fairfield will be a healthier district and our children will be in a better position to achieve success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker?
Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road. My son is the third generation in our family to attend the Fairfield Public Schools. Public education has been very important to our family, and yet I have to say my feeling about what I've witnessed this evening, what I've read in the paper over the last couple of weeks, my faith in where we're going has really been shaken. I am concerned that rules and requirements and policies seem to be taking a back seat to some other agenda, and I'm not sure what that is. We seem to have lacked our direction in this town educationally. We seem to be lost on our vision for education in this town, and we can't continue down this road. I don't know if any of you noticed, but I did. There was a total lack of parent involvement during the budget process in this town, and I don't know if it's because they're so in favor of it or if it was a vote of no confidence in where we currently stand. Something has to change. It has to, because children are what we're all here for. The education of these children is what we're here for. To hear us discuss whether a book was vetted or not vetted, we can go down the argument that the new book that we're going to get come this fall wasn't vetted with a pilot program, yet it was approved. We have to be cautious on the way we go, and I'm concerned there's another agenda here, and I hope I'm wrong. I really do, because we can't keep doing this. The kids are the ones we're impacting. So I ask you, when you go into whatever session you're going to go in, that we look to the future and what is best. Thank you.
And thank you for your service on the Mission and Goals Review Committee. One of the, please, the last speaker, one of the issues that we face in looking at public comment is that when I think we're at the last speaker, somebody else stands up. So I'm going to declare this to be the last speaker, and then we'll move to open board comment.
Susie Byrne, Cross Highway. You know, I was listening to this at home because I was, out with my kids, and I caught the tail end of what Dr. Title was talking about when he was speaking about the math. And gosh, it was just so disappointing. I mean, just so disappointing to hear he blamed the lawyer at the state. He blamed Laura Anastasio.
If I could interrupt you for a moment, as we've always commented, please talk about the principals and not address individual members of the staff or board members.
I'm addressing...
Please discuss the principle that you're talking about.
The principle I'm talking about is not blaming others for your own mistakes. And what I heard was someone commenting who was blaming another person, blaming Laura Anastasio for not having resolved the book matter. I heard somebody blame the lawyer for the town, for the Board of Ed, for giving bad advice that the book was legal. It was a pilot, and so therefore it was legal. I've heard the same person blame parents for the book not working. It's not parent-friendly. It's not learning-friendly. I suppose that same person blames me for filing the complaint in the first place. I have to tell you, I got an email 2 weeks ago from my son's teacher that said the entire class failed Chapter 8 and 9. The entire class. And guess what? They retook the test. So, of course, your data is going to show that people are doing okay on average because they've been retaking tests all year long. So I just wish that the board would make sure that people just take ownership, take responsibility. If that had happened in October and somebody had taken ownership and responsibility and said, it didn't work, it was a mistake.
Thank you, Mrs.
We wouldn't be here.
Time's up. Thank you, Mrs. Byrne. We now go to open board comment. Let me just start with two comments. As the Riverfield and Ludlow project went through the town review process, both at the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, and I presume the same question will come at the RTM, is that each member wanted to be assured that our board was fully aware that our capital projects list needs to conform with the waterfall list within the town. And I indicated at that time that our board had discussed the updated capital list, but had said that once we find out from the town what they have approved relative to Riverfield or Ludlow, once we have heard from the Wooded report, and once we have heard from the security report, that this board had purposefully planned on doing an official update to the capital projects plan in the fall, but that we were cognizant that we had a responsibility to work with the town in adjusting our projects so that they fit within the waterfall chart. So if the question comes up in the RTM, I'll be saying essentially the same thing. And then they also have asked, well, which project is more important than the other? And I have consistently said that our board has not voted which project, which school we love best, that both projects fulfill a particular goal, one being the elimination of portables, and the other is meeting the space needs at the high school, and that they stand quite separate because they are both important to us, or otherwise we would not have advanced them. So the RTM will be scheduling their committee meetings on the 17th and the 19th at Riverfield School, so that RTM members can have a tour of that, and then they have a date, but not a time set up yet, for a separate tour of Ludlow. And once that official date is known, we'll alert the board, and of course, those members who have an interest in seeing where this is going with the RTM, I encourage you to show up at committee meetings, because 5 meetings are held on those 2 different days, and we need to be able to cover all of them. So that's where we are with the review process. And other board comments. Mrs. Brand and then Mr. Liu.
I actually heard a couple of board members in public comment addressing other town bodies refer to an interest in pursuing school lunch, particularly at the high school level, and that involved a high school schedule issue. I would like to see that on an agenda. I realize that June 25th is not the best option, so in the fall. I also would suggest, since I know there was a tremendous amount of research and deliberation in the past on this at the board table, that we go back and get some of that information, perhaps then not have to start, from scratch and get updates. There might be differences from then, but I know from experience, as I said earlier, that it did end up being cost prohibitive. Perhaps that's changed, but I think it's worth having it as an agenda item.
Thank you for that reminder. That is the other question they asked, and our response has been that individual board members have expressed an interest in addressing that question. The administration has an interest in addressing that question, and it's not just because of scheduling lunch for all kids, but there are other issues with the schedule, instructional time, improving quality and whatnot, that there's a lot of reasons for us to address that question. Mr. Liu.
Thank you. Regarding the overtime and Mr. Cullen's memo, I emailed Dr. Tittle earlier today and told him that I wanted to talk about this during the open board comment so that there wouldn't be any surprises. I've quickly have gone through this and one of the new administrative regs, and to me, at a couple of glances, it does not seem to fit the spirit of what we voted on. There seems to be a lot of other fees in here, and I can understand the confusion and the apprehensiveness that the PTAs are feeling about this, because I thought we were only voting for overtime. So maybe, Dr. Tittle, you could discuss this with us.
Yeah, I'm going to try to clear it up with, I think we had an appointment later in the week with Lisa Havey, because I don't think it's that complicated. The problem is that the regulations and the letter apply to a whole host of groups, not simply the groups that are hit by the overtime. So there's all kinds of people impacted by this, so it's much thicker than you would think. But the bottom line is that groups such as PTAs or scouts or whatever who previously had been exempt from rental fees and exempt from overtime fees will remain exempt from rental fees and will be paying overtime fees only when we incur overtime. In other words, any use of the building during the normal weekday hours where there's a custodian on duty, there's going to be no change in the practice. And if they use the building on the weekends and we incur overtime, then the rate is in there for what that is, and that's where the charge is going to hit. So really, that's the change as it impacts PTAs. So a PTA meeting or an event from 7 to 9 on a weeknight doesn't incur any fee structure. The fees hit when you go past 11 o'clock or you do a Saturday or a Sunday. That's really how it's intended to work. If we've not been clear in the communication, then we will try to clarify that. That's how it impacts those particular groups.
Open board comment is not really intended for discussion back and forth on an item, but please make a follow-up comment and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up. Again, yes, I think that you made the part clear about the weekdays, but weekends, I don't think that was discussed at all. And we could call it a no man's land, but it seems to me that it goes against the spirit of what we were trying to do. So if I may make a recommendation that I don't mean to put this on you guys, but is a sent to policy that we can oversee how these regs are going to be defined, because I have the feeling that what we voted on in the budget was definitely not what I'm seeing coming out here in these regs.
Mr. Chair, we're starting to have a discussion. That's not on the
correct.
agenda.
So thank you for your comment, and we'll move on to other comments. Any other comments that people need to make under open board comment? Okay, if not, then we are at the end of our regular meeting, and we do have an executive session that, so the members of the public will know, we will convene, we'll make the motion here, but we will convene into the superintendent's conference room so that you do not have to be rushed out of here if you have conversations you want to take. So the recommended motion is that the Board of Education convene to executive session to discuss superintendent evaluation. Do I have Mrs. Cannelli and Mr. Convertito? All in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye. We have a unanimous vote. We will move into executive session in the superintendent's conference room. Thank you. I wasn't planning on it.